Hi.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Fine.
So, I know a little bit about you and your book as I've been reading your book. But what I would like to do is I would like to hear from you about you.
The original book I wrote on my experiences living in Mexico in 1973 when I was down there for about a year and was in Veladas with Maria Sabina.
Now, what took you there? Why did you go?
I went there to build a geodesic dome. I've been living in Mexico, and a friend up near Guadalajara was going to build way up in the mountains at a place called Tapalpa, which is like the Switzerland in Mexico, the geodesic dome. So I went down there, and then when I went with him to a couple of towns, I got very interested in some of the displays I saw about the mushrooms and peyote and that sort of thing, and went to the museum in anthropology. And that's sort of when I started my journey and started living with different curanderos in the mountains down there. And this book was written before I knew a lot about what I would say the pantheistic, monistic side of sacred mushrooms and the difference in understanding that from a Western Cartesian standpoint. But what I really want people to know today is I believe that my book and the presentation will prove that Quetzalcoatl was the foundation of the whole religious aspect in the sacred mushrooms of Mexico. And in particular, at the temple of the plumed serpent, which is sort of like a three-tiered pyramid with one sloping Tulud surface, then a Tubarro, and then a Tulud. There was this Mayan conyglyph that was repeated over 15 times, twice on the entrance to the pyramid. And the most amazing thing, in the books that there were 2 volumes of, and we can show you those books now.
Yeah.
This is volume 2, and that's volume 1, over 400 pages, 8.5 by 11, in detail. The glyph, the Mayan conyglyph, is repeated over 16 times, and every single thing in this book on the pyramid is described. And what it means in here is I eat or consume something sacred. But what was amazing was not once was it discussed what was sacred and what was eaten. The conyglyph here means I eat or consume or put something precious and sacred that I contain in my body. Not one time out of the 15 times was forelizard described. Forelizard is described in the Utah Codex here, and here as a stand-in for the sacred mushroom. It was a common 4th day of that calendar at 18 months and 20 days. So it's a very common symbol. Called the editor. The editor basically said, well, I don't know, maybe it was an iguana. I said, no, it wasn't, because the iguana is identified elsewhere. And I said, not only that, in this chapter, it's talked about nearly 50 times. Everything in minutiae is described in detail. That a eater consumes something precious, the first 2 part is mentioned 15 times, and close to 15 times spent on the temple, 4 times on the front entrance, and not one time is forelizard mentioned. Nothing is said about it at all. And I tried to track down the person who, the author of that chapter, who the editor, Ken Hirth, has said had dropped out of anthropology. She got her PhD at University of Kentucky in 1988. The book was basically given to almost every library in anthropology in the United States about the year 2000. And it's been 36 years since then, and I haven't been able to track down the name Virginia Smith, which I think a lot of people can understand why.
Right, yeah.
And the University of Kentucky had no information about where she went or anything, even though they know she got her PhD. But we had incredible disagreements about Xochicalco and the meaning. What made Xochicalco so unique was it was both Mayan and Nahuatl. And there were basically two languages spoken all the way from Central America to the American Southwest, to the Apache and the Kiowas and the Pueblos. The one in the south was Mayan, spoken by the Maya, and the one for the rest of the Central Valley going north all the way in the southwest was Nahuatl, or Nahuatl. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing things wrong, but the two different people, the traders, knew each other's languages. But what made Xochicalco so unique, besides being a side way up in the mountains, was it was both Mayan, or Maya, Zapotecan, Mixtec, and Tehuacanos. It's first influenced by the Olmecs and the Mayans, but I believe it was where this sacred mushroom temple was, which was a religious temple to Quetzalcoatl and to the sacred mushrooms, because the motifs for the sacred mushrooms and mushroom bags are all over this temple, and the stelas basically tell the mushroom viaje of Quetzalcoatl, which were found buried in 1961 in the Temple of the Stars of the Moon, which is now called the Temple of the Stelas. But the interesting thing, when you look at this place, it has a feathered serpent with a feathered tail and feathers on it, which the more warlike dynasties had serpent scales and a rattlesnake tail. At Xochicalco, there were no sacrificial racks. There were no places to sacrifice somebody. Nothing like that was found. There was no armory, which is called a house of darts, like there was at Teotihuacan and Chichen Itza. There was nothing to a ruling dynasty cult. And it was seemed to me to be a sacred sanctuary for learning about sacred mushrooms. And the place was so sacred, legends were that when you went by there, you stopped and nobody looked that way or ate or talked or godforsaken poop or pee, going past this place. It was really considered sacred where the wizards were. Now the interesting thing, it was destroyed about 900 AD. Now that's 300 years before the Aztecs come in the Central Valley.
Yeah.
And I think it was the same reason that Xochicalco, Tolpasan Quetzalcoatl was forced to leave Teotihuacan and go to Chichen Itza because of teaching practice of love and not warfare, not human sacrifice, and not slavery, and teaching people about the sacred mushroom and healing. There seemed to be two different cultures. You could have a warlike culture and a peaceful culture. Nobody knows for sure who attacked Xochicalco in 900, but I believe the three stelas were inside the pyramid of the plumed serpent, which was 180 feet away, or no, 120, and it could be broken in half and carried by one really strong person or two, and then the slab was broken open and they were buried there, covered with sand, and then three big blocks were put over it from the side like it was a ceremonial center.
Yeah.
Because if they would have buried it under the ground or anything like that, they would have been easily found. And if raiders came, they probably would have either stolen it, or if they wanted to get rid of it, it'd been easy to pound to dust because you're 6,000 feet in the mountain and the wind would have just blown it all over.
Yeah.
So my book was a translation of the Stelas of Xochicalco, and the last book I was reading were these two books, where I got permission from the University of Utah, and I was stunned to find this description of the Maya coneglyph, which is actually very easy to interpret and very obvious to me why they didn't interpret four lizard, because the Mexican mycologist is talking about page 24 of the 40 of the Yucatán Codex, which appeared about close to 500 years later, says it's basically drawn as a pictograph that what was sculptured at Xochicalco. And four lizard is presented there 4 times at the start of the ceremony as a representative, self-representing and self-representative of the sacred mushroom. And we have to realize that this was a pantheistic culture that relied on these sacred mushrooms for healing and physical healing. That's the thing that's been missing in our society today, because we are stuck in a lack of meaning about God. For example, the head of the Harvard School of Divinity is an atheist, which is absurd. So modern people think in our Cartesian Western sort of duality, and they're always stuck in it. And they never understand about mushrooms when they take the sacred mushroom and come out of it, that they understand what happened or remember it, but they never understand how or why, because you have to understand this from a pantheistic, sort of animistic sort of view of neutral monism, where we're both male and female at the same time, and then the separation. Mm-hmm. And in this particular ceremony, what was unique was that they would take the sacred mushrooms after fasting. Now, what I've been able to determine by my research, that they would fast for a couple of days to get the body empty, just on water.
Okay, that's what I was, okay.
And then before the ceremony, a couple of hours, they would drink cacao because of the 2 bliss transmitters in there to get into a good mood. Mm. Then they would eat the sacred mushroom by dipping it in honey. They didn't have the honey bee like we did, but they had a stingless bee that's common in the southern Mexico all the way through Central America and even in Cuba, that made the honey. And they would stick the mushroom into the honey and put it in their mouth to eat it. And when they put it in their mouth to eat it, it's somewhere from 6 to 7 times stronger than if you put it and you chew it and swallow it. And I'll explain that now. And the reason for that is, when you swallow the mushroom and eat it, your stomach acids and the bacteria attack it. That's why you get the smell. Whereas if you eat it with honey and don't swallow, all you do is smell the aroma of the honey. Mm. And secondly, when it goes into your stomach, you're lucky if 90% gets through. But even if 95% gets through, which would be rare, 80% of that is going to be destroyed by the liver, because it has to go from the small intestine to the liver. And so the liver destroys 80%, so you're essentially getting 15% maximum of what you're swallowing. Mm-hmm. They were using a super powerful mushroom that's much more powerful than like the Psilocybe cabensis people use here, called the Zapotecorums, which are called the crown of thorns, which has an unbelievable high ratio of psilocin in it. Now, when you take the sacred mushroom and put it in your mouth with honey, and you chew, you hold your mouth up and keep your lips closed while you're chewing, and you're chewing and chewing, but your saliva and the honey changes this carbohydrate alkaloid into a pure sugar glucose alkaloid blood transfusion. And it goes from your gums and the roof of your mouth and around your mouth directly by 100% blood transfusion to the cerebral spinal column and to your brain. And the inside of your cheeks is a buccal transmission straight to the ventral aorta of your heart, which is where the oxygen is being pumped into the body. And that's when your body starts coordinating the perfect rhythm of your breathing to your heartbeat to heal yourself. Now, with 15 to 20 grams of this mushroom, it goes incredible fast. People would think it's slow.
Yeah.
If it's fresh mushroom, sometimes it is a little bit slow because you're also absorbing the water.
Mhm.
But with dried mushrooms, it seems like it's going super fast, like it's getting sucked into the bloodstream of your mouth.
Huh. Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask about. How long does it take? Yeah.
Yeah, and if you have to swallow a little bit, just don't spit anything out because it's a sacrament. Go ahead and swallow, but sometimes in between eating, I would drink a glass of spring water or a glass of rainwater because you need to get a lot of water
Yeah.
because this is going to create a lot of energy. And the legend of Quetzalcoatl, and what happens is your cerebral spinal fluid starts to vibrate. When your cerebral spinal fluid starts to vibrate, that's when the healing force comes